it would not be hard for someone to create a deep fake. It would not be hard for someone to get this video and change it so that we would be saying things which were not us. Now, that's going to be a problem for social media. You're going to start to see people saying things on channels, people that sound, look, share views that you may have, but are not necessarily reflective of what they're saying.
My guest this week is Blair Crawford, who is a cybersecurity expert and business founder. Blair has a Bachelor's of Business from the University of Strathclyde, and he worked in various marketing and sales roles and also spent some time backpacking across Australia. He's currently the founder and CEO of the biometric ID company Daltrey. Blair, welcome to STEM with Mr. N.
Thanks, Stuart. Great to be here. Looking forward to the chat.
It's a pleasure to have you on, and thank you for getting up early in the morning to join us since you are out there in Australia. So can I just start off with who are Daltrey? What do they do?
Daltrey is a biometric cyber defense company. So what that means is we use biometric technology, so facial recognition, iris recognition, or fingerprint recognition to confirm the identity of people. Now, those people are typically our team members that work in businesses, work in government. And what we do is we make sure that those people can be identified really easily when they're looking to get into the environments that they have in their business. So, for example, getting into Microsoft so that they can do their work for the day.
Why is there a focus there on biometrics? Are you trying to get away from typical passwords and focus more on that facial recognition, iris recognition, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest security risk right now when it comes to cyber is passwords or weak credentials. We also want to make sure that not only getting rid of the passwords to improve the security posture of businesses, but we can actually make it really easy for users to get into their work environments. No one wants to remember long passwords. I know how hard it is when you have to do not only a long string of passwords, but then you have to put in special characters, a capital, add a number, and then you have to do MFA, one-time passwords, so on and so forth. So we want to make it really easy for the user, but we also want to make it very secure for the team members as well as the businesses they work for, so that we can defend against the threat actors and hackers out there trying to get into our businesses right now.
Right now, there's a lot going on with artificial intelligence, and you get things like deep fakes and different things like that. How does that affect what you do in terms of biometric security?
That's a great question. So often where we see the mainstream messaging around something like deep fakes, we've got to really think about where a technology like that will actually impact what we do as an organization, for example. So I'll tell you how we defend against deepfakes first, but then I'll also give you some perspective of where deepfakes are a real problem. So how we defend against deepfakes is we use a technology called liveness detection. What that means is when someone looks to present themselves with, let's say, facial recognition, we are looking for that person to be live and present. So we're using artificial intelligence to defend against deepfakes by looking for proof of life during an authentication. And that's one part of it when someone's presenting themselves in front of a camera. The other part to protect against deepfakes is to make sure that no one can inject video streams or deepfake streams directly into the network. We do that with our various cybersecurity technologies so that someone can't bypass the liveness detection. So we get various layers, and that's why we call ourselves a biometric cyber defense company, because it's not just about making sure the identity of someone matches, one biometric template to another. It's about making sure the integrity of that biometric template hasn't been altered. Now, where deepfakes really are a problem and something that I am concerned about is when it comes to influencing people, let's say, by creating images and videos of persons saying things which are not true. Now, that's going to be a big problem. There is so much content right now, even just from this video here of you, Stuart, and of me, Blair, it would not be hard for someone to create a deep fake. It would not be hard for someone to get this video and change it so that we would be saying things which were not us. Now, that's going to be a problem for social media. You're going to start to see people saying things on channels, people that sound, look, share views that you may have, but are not necessarily reflective of what they're saying. So we've got to be careful of that. One of the ways that we can do it, again, is with liveness detection. It could be used in that context to prove who is actually doing something, to watermark that it was a live recording of someone saying something as opposed to an artificially generated video or image. But it's definitely something we have to be careful of, but it's separate, right? One for authentication, cybersecurity is going to be protecting. The other is when we're on our social media channels and we're seeing people saying things which are not necessarily reflective of what that person would actually say.
And this is actually something I was planning on speaking about later in the interview, but because we're on the topic now and we've spoken so much.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm happy to go with the flow. I recently spoke to an audio engineer or an acoustics engineer and spoke to him about artificial intelligence in terms of the voice. And if somebody puts out a video, are there ways to detect that it is an artificially generated voice? Obviously, you're focused more on the image side of things. So if somebody was to take a live recording like this is, and then change what we were saying, are there ways to actually detect that there is a fake element there from the liveness that we currently have?
There is technology which is also based on artificial intelligence and machine learning to look for certain markers which would infer that it had been generated unnaturally. However, voice is particularly susceptible. And you're also talking about the application. So the way that voice is going to be replicated for malicious purposes is to generate calls. So I don't know if you've seen the is it Deutsche Bank or Deutsche Telekom? They've released a video about how we have to protect kids and the younger generation from their personally identifiable information and images and voice clips being shared on social media. And it's a really good ad which shows how voice and face, but I'll focus on voice for a second, can be used on calls. So if you can generate a call, which is basically a person looking for help, I'm stuck in this country, I'm traveling right now, I need you to send me money as an emergency. If you send that type of voice note to a parent or to a friend, it sounds so like the person that you're going to, from a probability perspective, get enough people just doing it and not questioning it. You're not really going to get an investigation via phone call into whether the voice is real or not. Now, I think there has to be technology for that. Where that technology is going to sit is going to be interesting, because the way that you would have to do it would be to somehow listen to spam. It would be a spam call, right? You would somehow have to have technology on the endpoint or at the telco side that would be identifying what was being said and then looking to give you markers or indicators as to whether this might be a computer generated voice. Now, this is where it's really interesting from a technology standpoint, because you're starting to enter into a really grey area with privacy here. We need to have encrypted calls. We need to be able to protect our privacy. So what is the role of technology at an endpoint or centrally when it comes to listening to a voice to see if it's real or not? So we've got to have a practical way of assessing the risk and the application of technology if it was to be decided that was the right thing to do to protect people from voice type attacks. Now, we'll start to see more of that being applicable over the next couple of years. But from my perspective, voice is the most susceptible and probably the hardest one to defend against. Face, finger, and iris. Face from a deepfake perspective, but iris and finger from a liveness perspective, there are more things you can do by significant magnitudes to protect against fake ones.
And in that answer, you'd mentioned about having to protect children and young people just now from their identity, and there's a lot of obviously different social media channels, and children are getting involved in these at younger and younger ages, and particularly on the likes of TikTok, there are generative AIs for you to make your image look a certain way. So how can children make sure that they're protecting their personal identity from these AIs, which might seem like a bit of fun, but could actually potentially be harmful?
This is a big topic. Cyber and online safety from a very young age, I believe, has to be part of curriculum. Whether it's delivered from the parents or whether it's delivered by schools, we need to fast track the education of the younger generations about the potential risks down the line. So if you take me for an example, I don't have any social media apart from LinkedIn. One, because it was a distraction for me and I was busy, but the other was that a lot of the information that is shared on them, there is scope creep. So you end up with your data all over the place and it can be used against you. When it comes to the younger generations and social media, there is so much content out there now. In many cases, especially from our generation and probably the one after us, that it's quite hard to get that back. There's images and there's videos of us everywhere. But we need to be able to say, what are we consenting to? What are the rules that govern what we're sharing with these platforms? And what is the scope for what they will use it? Now, the problem itself is not necessarily with individual pieces of data being shared. So your name, your phone number, an image, whatever it may be. It's when there's so much of it and that the data security controls are not in place where people can start combining all of that information to start replicating your identity, to start doing something called social engineering. So social engineering is when someone has got so much information about you that they can impersonate, for example, a bank to try and get more information from you. And you're like, oh, okay, that bank knows so much about me. It must be them. Here's my additional piece of information. So to answer the question more specifically, don't give away too much data. Be really careful who you're adding on social media. Be really careful about what you're sharing on social media because it won't go anywhere once it's on there. It's very difficult to actually enforce something like the right to be forgotten under the GDPR principles. Make sure you're using complex passwords if you still have to use passwords when you're logging into things, and always make sure you're putting on a second factor of authentication. Take it really seriously that you want to protect your data from a young age because you don't want it to be used against you as you start to grow up to replicate your identity. Or, as I mentioned a moment ago, for someone to pretend they are you so that they can scam your parents out of money because they think you're in danger.
And the younger generation just now, they have a bit of an advantage that they're growing up in the social media world. So parents and teachers, we're able to educate them about social media and all these dangers. Whereas when you and I were growing up, these things all have come about in our lifetime. Facebook, Twitter, or X as it now is, and all of these. So we've had to try and figure it out as we go along. We didn't have obviously the same technology back when we were young. And this is actually a good point to go back to when we were young. Now, Blair and I went to primary school together. We've known each other a very long time, but I don't know about where your interest in STEM has come from that's led you into this technology path. So where did that interest come from?
I probably showed all the markers that's where I should have gone in my career at an early day. And I think this is really an important point. My highest grades when I was in high school were in computing. And in my spare time, what I spent most of my time doing was messing around with computers, building computers. It was at the advent, as you said, of the internet. But for whatever reason, all of those grades, and I've mentioned this to you before, Stuart, the guidance that I got was to go down the course of business. So naturally, I had an interest in STEM just because that's where my natural curiosity had taken me. But for many years, I went down a different path. So the first thing is that I would be saying here, if you have a natural curiosity about a certain technology and you're not sure what you should be doing, or you're not sure where the application of that curiosity will be in your careers, make sure you're speaking to your teachers. Make sure you're speaking to someone like Stuart, who obviously knows the applications of the technology out in the world. But also make sure that curiosity extends from just tinkering with certain things to looking and investigating, because you have all of the resources at your disposal now to go and see what the next technology vectors are and what that technology is going to be used for. So to go back to your question, Stuart, I was naturally always interested in it, but the guidance I was given, probably, and because I didn't really know what I was that I should do with that curiosity, I went into business. I ended up in very, large commercial roles. But eventually that curiosity kind of raised its head again when I started working with tech companies. And it's when I started working with tech companies and cybersecurity companies and biometric companies, it wasn't just about selling a product to market to provide some sort of benefit to the customer. I naturally realized that I was good at it because I wanted to understand how the technology worked. What is this biometric thing? How do you protect biometrics against the types of attacks that we're now seeing here from deepfakes, or how do you make sure a person is real? And I think there and then, that's where I had, let's for lack of a better word, a bit of an ignition to, at a later stage in my life, without any formal training, to really go in to how things work. STEM is the future. It's the basis of all of the careers that we're seeing out there. And whether you're talking about artificial intelligence, building infrastructure, I'm reading an amazing book right now called Project Hail Mary by a guy called Andy Weir, and it's basically about saving the planet. And all of the heroes in it are physicists. I really don't know what they're talking about, to be honest. It is heavily science-based, huge amounts of mathematics and complex theories. It's a great story in its own right, but I think the natural curiosity that I have in there, I find myself reading a chapter and then looking up the problems that they're trying to solve, whether it's on ChatGPT or whether it's on other resources. So I recommend that book to everybody, but I also think that it's really good to follow what's natural to you and to really understand, and this is key, what the application of the things which you're interested in when it comes to STEM are in the real world. And, that's pretty much everything these days.
And obviously you said in there that you received what you determined to be probably not the best guidance for you based on your grades and your natural curiosity. Do you think that would be different if more industries were involved in the education system to be able to give that advice or show pupils where applications of interests can be?
100%. I think it's two things. It's the involvement of industry at an earlier stage. Now, I don't know, I'm not in the school system anymore, so I don't know whether that problem has been fixed. And I also don't know the difference, between public and private schools. I had a great school. I loved school. I loved everything about it. I made some great friends. I obviously was given enough guidance to go in a direction that, I ended up here. But the involvement of industry in the application of why you do things, I think, is really important. But I also think, given that we're on your podcast, is teachers like you who are spending time with industry and speaking to people about their journeys, which is really important. Um, again, I don't know teachers generally across the board, but I do have a feeling that the teachers that I was exposed to, although they were great and they looked after us and they gave us the best of what they could, it was quite traditional in the sense of, here are the textbooks, here's what's written, and here's what we're going to teach you. Whereas I think everybody will appreciate now that the application of education and the way that people learn is significantly more dynamic. It's more fluid. I mean, a lot of the work that you would do now in STEM related roles doesn't necessarily require a degree. There's a lot of self-taught. Like, I know that a lot of the people that we work with, especially in our hacking community, so our ethical hackers that will look to protect us, they don't have formal education in terms of, they didn't go to a school to learn how to do something called penetration testing. So yeah, I think the involvement with industry to help with the practical applications, but I think also the nature of teachers is probably changing as well, where they span the boundary between what comes after school with what happens in school.
And obviously, I mentioned earlier, we grew up together, and people will be able to tell from your accent that I didn't grow up in Australia, that we grew up in the same place. So why did you decide to set up business in Australia rather than returning home, as it were?
I mean, the opportunity presented itself while I was here. I've known for a while that I wanted to start a business. I mean, I think the thing that's in you about this whole idea of starting a business, it can sound quite glamorous, but fundamentally, you need to have the right idea, and you need to be able to test that idea can be validated and is valuable in the market. So where I was, when I had my idea to do Daltrey, I was in Australia. I was exposed to a problem which existed in Australia with biometric systems and with security, which obviously was validated to be true across different markets as well. So, Daltrey is a global company. I traveled a lot last year to Europe and into the US. That's one of the really amazing things about having a business or working for a company that has a global application. You can see how your technology and the problem of identity and being able to give a team member, for example, the opportunity to prove who they are, which keeps them safe, but also for the company to thwart attacks on their systems because they know who they're interacting with. To see how that plays out across completely different countries in very similar ways, but is nuanced by culture, the nature of their business, the human factor, is really cool. So there's nothing particularly specific about starting in Australia, aside from that's where I live, that's where my life is, and that's where I noticed the opportunity.
And obviously, as time goes on, technology is just continuing to advance, and there's a lot of STEM careers that exist now that didn't exist when we were young, and STEM careers is where the future is going. So what knowledge and skills do you think children and young people should be developing to be able to work in the STEM industries, and in particular in the technology industry?
Yeah, so that first piece, this curiosity, don't ignore it. If you're naturally drawn to the things which we're talking about and you talk about in your podcast, Stuart, or that you see as you interact with technology just in your daily lives, whether it be in social media, things that you see pop up, if you're interested in the artificial intelligence, if you look at SpaceX and you see all these satellites going up, if there is something in you which makes that you can't quite explain yet, but that you're interested in, go and speak to a teacher, go and speak to Stuart, go and research it, and then go and find out the applications for that technology. The other thing is, aside from your curiosity, if there is something that you're particularly interested in, don't wait for that education to just come to you via the natural structures within the education system. So through primary school, through high school, into college or into university, make sure that you're also exposing yourself to what's happening in those industries that you're interested in through extracurricular disciplines. You know, go and try and get an internship in something. Go and try and self-educate with all the resources, which I wish I had, and I'm sure you wish you had, Stuart, when we were younger. Use the education system absolutely as the foundation and the structure. And if you need specific qualifications to do something just because that's the way that it is, then do that. But don't let that be the only way that you learn, because there are plenty of ways to fast track or to differentiate yourself from others. If you look to immerse yourself in something that you're naturally curious about as you go through the education system.